This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV. It's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
Friends across Duck Country, Dr. Mike here, and a few comments before we dive into this week's very packed episode. Please go find the Wild Look Photography and support Matt Mezowitz. Matt is the FowlWeather Podcast Photographer of the Year and a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. A great young professional and amazing photographer. This week, we feature one of his great pictures of a shoveler as our thumbnail for the podcast. Second, find a few minutes to support your young entrepreneur, McKinley Dixon of Northern Latitude Foods. They were our guests last week on the podcast, and please do look up Northern Latitude Foods and order some wild rice using the 10% discount code FowlWeather2024. That's FOWL, weather, WEATHER, 2024 as one word. Another one. I personally provided habitat consultation this year in collaboration with Ryan Delaney of Wildlife Strategies. Ryan is a proud graduate of the wildlife program at Mississippi State University. This year, I specifically consulted on 2 Wisconsin, 1 Ohio, and 2 New York properties. If you have interest in buying land and need to know if the habitat is right or could be managed for ducks, give me a shout. If you already have land and want to increase its value, give me a shout at Dr. Mike at FowlWeather.co. That's co, not .com. My schedule's really filling up for site visits next summer, so please do reach out as soon as possible if you have interest in a site consultation. But above all, think about it this way. We at the FowlWeather Podcast are supporting Matt, McKinley, and Ryan as the amazing professionals that they are. They're finding their way in a very competitive world. Look, I'm a teacher at heart. I walk into the classroom each day and aim for optimism, positive progress, and lift young people up so they can positively affect the conservation world around us. I couldn't be happier providing support for these 3 wonderful gentlemen, so please also find some time to support them. Thank you. Last, I really want to acknowledge that I do throw a fair bit of shade on the FowlWeather Podcast, even later on in this episode, but none of that comment from me is meant to be malicious. It really stems from decades of experience as a duck hunter, waterfowl biologist, teacher, flyway tech section representative for a while, and traveler from north to south in the central Mississippi and Atlantic flyways, and not just for, to travel to hunt or anything, or even a few months here and there, but in employment, for long periods of time where I lived embedded in those cultures. And I feel like really got to know folks from north to south. I've studied and worked with the best of the best. Some still with us, and some passed on to the great duck marsh in the sky like Dave Ankney. So when I comment, it is not a flippant comment. It is not a passing critique. It is because I truly believe that we, as duck hunters in the duck culture, deserve the best, non-biased, and helpful information possible. It was a big part of why we started the podcast, to entertain and inform, but we really take that information part seriously. Mostly we wanted to provide a better duck hunting experience through quality duck migration forecasts and quality information about how the duck world works. Okay, on to the main portion of the episode. Thank you for being listeners and dedicated listeners of the FowlWeather Podcast. And please do support Matt, McKinley, and Ryan. These wonderful professionals and folks like them, they're our future.
You are tuned in to the FowlWeather Podcast, the forecast to your next successful hunt. Coming to you from the home office, Jack's Reef, New York.
Well, my friends, episode 50 of the FowlWeather Podcast. Thanks for being with us throughout the last year, and thanks to our new listeners as well. If y'all haven't made it all the way back through all the episodes, we suggest you continue to play catch-up. But this week, we are also going to detail how we develop weather severity indices that we use to predict duck migration each week from October to January. And we will do so providing new details on why they work so well to help you pick the best days to hunt. To get the most up-to-date episodes, we suggest you follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Then when we drop a new episode, you get a notification directly to your phone, tablet, or computer. Also, please take time to rank the FowlWeather Podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We thank our every week listeners. You know who you are. Those that never miss a single migration forecast episode each Monday morning. We appreciate y'all very, very much. Y'all are as ate up as me about ducks, duck biology, and duck migration. You know where the ducks are at before the ducks know where they're at. Think about that. You know where the ducks are at before the ducks even know where they're at. Our dedicated weekly listeners can pick the best days to hunt because the FowlWeather Podcast forecasts fresh ducks hot from the north. Shoot the ducks from the north before they know where they're at. I'm your host, Dr. Mike, coming to you from the home office in Jack's Reef. Hot and dry is our theme at the farm for the foreseeable future. But wow, did places in the lower Mississippi Flyway just get some much-needed rain from Hurricane Francine. The ultra-dry August in Mississippi and Alabama are all but eliminated in, 24 hours of rain. East Tennessee and Kentucky also got much-needed rain, along with sections of eastern Arkansas. The next system to watch is camped out off the North Carolina coast and will bring an estimated 3 to 6 inches of rain to North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Mostly in coastal regions, so if you haven't caught water yet in an impoundment, now might be the time to grab some in these portions of the Atlantic coast. But if your moist soil vegetation is not browned down yet, if it's not at shatter stage where seeds are falling from it, just let the feet get wet on that stuff, folks. Don't fully flood and kill all the great, crop of seeds for ducks that you're, still producing. Also, if I was a betting man, I'd put my money on at least one more Gulf system to push lots of rain up in the Mississippi Flyway. And it's likely that the Atlantic coast was just going to see system after system as we continue, near this peak of hurricane season. So stay tuned because each week we're going to be providing tropical system highlights like this one to help you prepare your wetlands for the coming season. Also check us out on Facebook for some images and an analysis of the drought and moisture situations across the country. Okay, let's jump right into how we make our migration forecasts each week. We've been working on these weather severity indices that predict duck migration since about 2008, or about a decade and a half. Since initial development, we've really fine-tuned them to more accurately predict duck migration by latitude. And later in this episode, we'll unveil the newest edition, which are diving duck migration predictions. All of this work came out of wanting to know if the weather that affected duck migration had in fact changed. Okay, spoiler alert. The weather has certainly gotten milder that causes ducks to migrate since the 1980s. We've published several scientific papers on this topic. But when we originally went to look for published literature telling us what type of weather affected duck migration, it didn't exist. Surprisingly, although we all talk about weather in the duck blind all the time, and duck hunters probably think more about weather than any other group of hunters, we still didn't have numbers to put to weather that could give us a prediction about the timing of duck migration, or if the weather as interpreted by a duck had changed. The weather severity investigations all came just after a period of low duck numbers in 2005, and folks in the Deep South were kind of freaking out, like they are now. So the question became, where are all the mallards? Yeah, the numbers were low, but how much of this had to do with a stalled migration because of mild weather? Oh, wow. Does this sound familiar? Yeah, it does. So we've been at this place before, folks. Every time the mallard number declines, people freak out, asking for shorter seasons and lowered bag limits. We've been through at least 4 of these exact iterations or situations. But wow, guess what? The population rebounded. Anyhow, I'm not going to beat that drum too much right now. More on mallard season lengths and bag limits towards the end of this episode. So in 2008, when my wife and I got to Mississippi, I was doing a postdoc with Dr. Rick Kaminsky, and my wife was getting her master's degree working on wetland reserve program lands in the Mississippi Delta. So in 2008, when we got there, people were freaking out. So what we wanted to answer was if the weather had changed as interpreted by a duck. And, by duck, we all know I mean mallard. So we looked for quality waterfall survey data, and we found it in Missouri, who has among the best funding for waterfall management at the state level in the country because they have a conservation tax that goes directly to the Missouri Department of Conservation. I don't know, call it socialist conservation if you like, but anyhow, they had quality survey data, and we paired that data with nearby weather station data and tested a variety of combinations of weather variables to determine which of them contributed most to increases and decreases in mallards and other dabbling ducks at a location. We tested everything, moon phases, photo period, sunspots, but we were really mostly interested in understanding the effect of weather on increases and decreases in mallards and other dabbling ducks across that mid-latitude of Missouri. What we found was that it was the cumulative effect of 1, how cold was it on a given day, 2, how much snow was on the ground that day, 3, how many days in a row had there been below freezing temperatures, and 4, how many days in a row had there been measurable snow on the ground that would affect field feeding. This was pretty cool because it took into account both immediate and long-term effects on food intake and energy output. The colder it gets, the more a duck has to eat just to maintain body temperature and fat reserves. That cold also affects wetland icing, which in turn can negatively impact access to food. Now, the consecutive days simply means greater likelihood of dropping water temperatures, wetland icing, and cumulative days of a negative energy balance for the duck. The snow is important for species like mallards that field feed because even when rivers remain open, if snow covers fields they are feeding in on waste grain, then again, they have low access to high-quality, high-energy foods. So this Weather Severity Index, or WSI, does pretty well at determining the threshold when mallards will increase in an area as well as when they start to decrease. The relationship is actually shaped like a curve, where mallard numbers typically increase as average daily temperature declines, with greatest increases in mallards being when the average temperature hovers right around 0. Then those increases decline. They're still increasing, but it's less of an increase as the WSI becomes greater until a threshold, which for a mallard typically takes extended cold and potentially some snow involved, but not always. This really helps us pinpoint the exact day we would expect mallards to leave an area in the north and show up someplace in the south. And then we can predict where they show up in the south because typically those locations have WSI values indicative of substantial increases from one day to the next. Okay, so that's for a mallard, a big duck that can field feed. So they're not a Canada goose that can really sit out bad weather, but they have fat stored and they use less energy per unit body mass than small ducks, right? So smaller ducks don't need as much energy every day to build up their fat reserves, but they also can't store fat like a mallard. So it takes more for a mallard to get fat, but once they do get fat, they don't burn that fat as quickly as, say, a green-winged teal. So for the other ducks, the non-mallards from that Missouri study, we just lumped everything into other dabbling ducks, and they typically migrated at much lower WSI or less severe weather than a mallard. But then when we were in Ontario, Canada, we worked with waterfall survey data from across the Mississippi and Atlantic flyways and separated everything out species by species. What we found for mallards and black ducks was the same exact combination of weather variables in nearly the same curve. So this was great because it was an independent data set that confirmed what we saw in those Missouri data and analyses. Now, the other species, the smaller species of dabbling ducks, people call them calendar ducks in the South, or they think they migrate at the same time every year based on day length or calendar. The reality is that we tested photoperiod or day length against weather variables, and it turns out that for all species other than blue-winged teal, the weather models were always better than photoperiod alone. Now, that doesn't mean that photoperiod does not play a role, just that when you also include weather, you get a superior predictor of duck migration. So these ducks do adjust their migration based on weather and are not specifically calendar migrants. We saw this last year with record counts of species like gadwall along the Illinois River by Forbes Biological Station way into winter when they are typically much farther south because the weather has pushed them there. So why do people call them calendar ducks then? The reason? I'd say it's because by the time y'all's seasons open in the south, weather has typically been severe enough to push those ducks into your area. So because they are already there, it is the perception that when you start duck hunting that they are calendar ducks. Of course, the mallards show up later, so we always think of them as driven more by weather. But the reality is that it is just a different combination of weather, or specifically more severe weather, that is necessary to make mallards go south. Now, just a quick recap of last year. Yeah, the mallard population was down, but damn it, it also was among the mildest winters on record. So where were the mallards? If you listened to the FowlWeather podcast, you knew they were just kind of everywhere. Go back and have a listen to those episodes. It's pretty clear that it was just an insanely warm winter with nearly no snow to the north. All right, then we have the blue-winged teal, which migrates at about the same time every year, and the best predictor isn't weather, it's actually day length or photoperiod. So I've heard a lot of folks talking about the little bit cooler temperatures we've had the past few weeks, and that it will cause blue wings to migrate south. Probably not a thing. They just hit the button at the right time because they're leaving a place they're not going to spend the winter, the prairies, which gets too cold for them on any given winter, and they're going to a very stable environment, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. So they act like our neotropical migrants. I've gone over this before, like your summer tanagers and your scarlet tanagers and your orioles and your grosbeaks and things like that. They act like that neotropical migrant, a bird that cannot stay on its breeding area, and its wintering area is very stable. So once the breeding season is done and they've got all that, nesting stuff over, they've recovered from nesting, they just go. And so it's really a day-length predictor that makes blue wings move. For the other species, they migrate in a predictable fashion based on the weather. It's really about how big you are to tolerate the cold and how do you feed. The earliest migrants are green-winged teal, widgeon, and shoveler. Shoveler, pretty small duck, really rely on wetlands. They are wetland obligates, or said another way, I ain't ever seen a spoonbill walking around on dry land in a cornfield. Then we have our green-winged teal that will field feed, but are tiny ducks. And then widgeon are aquatic veg eaters, or submerged aquatic vegetation, or as my students called it, wet lettuce. So like the shovelers, they're pretty much restricted to wetlands. So before the wetlands freeze, these ducks typically leave town. Only slightly more tolerant is the gadwall. Then the pintail leaves town, but they are affected a bit more by snow cover like the mallard, because they're also can typically be heavy field feeders as well. So we have these WSI models that really make sense for each species, which is super cool. But up until recently, we never had anything for diving ducks. So we used some Great Lakes and Upper Mississippi River survey data to help develop models for divers. Interestingly, they all had cues more tied to photoperiod than the dabbling ducks, but that timing of migration was still modified by weather. So what does this mean? As an example, for scaup or bluebills, in late October, they are always increasing in abundance, for instance, in the Upper Mississippi River region, but that increase is greater during milder WSI than more severe WSI, which probably means there is some overflight of a location to places farther south during those more severe WSI events. Then by mid-November, during milder WSI, for that period, bluebills are still increasing, but they are now decreasing in abundance at the same location under more severe weather severity, right? By mid-December, they are decreasing no matter what, but much less of a decrease, leaving the area of the upper Mississippi River under mild weather severity for that time of year, with very substantial decreases happening at the greater WSI for that time of year. This is fascinating and seems to differ from the dabbling duck WSI, which seems much more tied to weather. It is likely that because diving ducks are going to more stable environments of large rivers, lakes, and marine coastal environments, that when they are ready to leave, they just do. But these areas are not as stable as, say, the subtropics and tropics where blue-winged teals spend the winter, so divers still bet hedge a little bit by trying to hang on when the weather is milder than normal for a certain time of year. The other thing that we have going on for some species like canvasbacks is that they are a really big duck whose food has greatly increased in some places, and Great Lakes ice has decreased substantially in the past 3 decades. So the zebra mussel showed up in Lake St. Clair, which is basically a giant shallow bathtub, not technically a great lake, but very shallow and traditionally turbid or muddy. Then the zebra mussel showed up and cleared up the water. Then the wild celery came in because the water was more clear and the canvasbacks had a feast. Couple that with strongly declining Great Lakes ice cover, and it takes a lot to move canvasbacks to the Finger Lakes region of New York or down even further to Chesapeake Bay anymore. Coming up next, how we make our seasonal forecast, so stick with us, folks. Look, folks, the Farmland Group across the Mid-South is your one-stop shop for real estate brokerage, consulting, management, lending, and appraisals. If you own land or you want land, the Farmland Group is where it's at. With over $500 million in farm sales and growing, Gwynn and Shelby Smith have you covered. Look, if you're thinking about buying or selling, contact the Farmland Group to access their full suite of services. If you already own property and want to build equity and value, the Farmland Group gets it done. If you're looking to purchase a new property, well, they get that done too, and they have access to some of the best lending available. Looking to sell? Get it appraised with a Farmland Group affiliated appraiser. But let's be clear for our listenership too. They also offer farm and hunt property management to create places that attract more ducks and more bucks. Who doesn't want that? More ducks and more bucks. Let the Farmland Group build value into your property. Find them today at farmlg.com. That's farmlg.com. You're not going to be disappointed. Contact Shelby Smith today at farmlg.com and let him know that the Foul Weather Podcast sent you their way. All right, a highlight that everyone looks forward to each year from us are Part 1 and Part 2 long-term seasonal forecasts. These take into account broad atmospheric cycles and system responses to sea surface temperatures, Arctic ice cover, snow in Siberia, the strength of the polar vortex, and other smaller nuanced climate effects that are known to influence general patterns in winter weather across the U.S. A few key items here. The Farmer's Almanac is no better than random chance, so quit quoting it. You will see it on the news networks, on the web presence of news networks, but that is because it results in clicks, not because it is reputable information on the coming winter's weather. Next, yes, El Niño and La Niña can be used to predict winter weather across many areas of North America in most years, and you will hear a lot about them. But these broad atmospheric impacts are modified by the general warmth of equatorial oceans as well as the polar vortex. The ocean temperatures are just broadly warm and in some places excessively warm, and that at times can override any signature out there. This is just the pattern of a generally warming planet. Next, the polar vortex is a circulation of cold air that forms at the North Pole around the Arctic each meteorological fall and winter. The vortex itself is the strong circulation of cold air that spins like a vortex and holds cold air near the poles. On those years we have mild weather and fewer cold outbreaks, that is actually a strong polar vortex, or that vortex is spinning very tightly and holding cold air at the pole. Under a weak polar vortex, there is greater likelihood of wobble in that circulation, and we get blobs of cold air like an Alberta Clipper, or in the Great Lakes region, a lake effect event when cold Arctic air comes down out of Canada over the open and warm waters of the Great Lakes and dumps feet of snow in single events at times. So what causes the weak polar vortex? Those factors are many, and I'm not going to name all of them here, but oddly enough, the weather in Siberia is a strong driver of high and low pressure systems that can cause a wobbly jet stream and facilitate cold air to push out of the Arctic and down our flyways. This causes dropping temperatures and cold air to collide with moist Gulf and Pacific air, resulting in potentially strong snow events. So what happens in Siberia is that if the advance of snow cover in October is greater than normal, a cold high-pressure system sets up and creates a blocking event that creates substantial bends in the jet stream across the world, which propagates to North America, disrupts the polar vortex, and results in a greater likelihood of cold outbreaks. So what affects snowfall in Siberia then? Well, actually, a lack of ice cover just north of Siberia in the coming month provides the moisture fuel for snowfall in October. Then, if it's cold enough and the wind's just in the right direction, cold air picks up that moist air from that open Arctic Ocean and dumps it in the form of snow across Siberia, setting up that cold high I just described. The most accurate predictions for the coming winter come out typically in the early part of November because we have to see how Siberian snow sets up in October, which in turn affects the polar vortex, and in combination with equatorial ocean temperatures, and this year a weak La Nina, then we can make better predictions about the coming winter weather. Right now, though, we are most likely to have a warmer than normal fall going into November. Yeah, we've had some cooler mornings, but overall I wouldn't expect that to be anything other than a course correction. So hold on, my friends. Sometime in October, we will come out with part 1 of our long-term seasonal forecast, and then part 2, the more accurate one, the best one I'd say to hang your hat on, will come out in early November. For now, the FowlWeather Podcast team did stick our neck out with a few broad predictions, so go ahead and check out episode 45, the preseason primer, if you want a taste of what's to come. On the other side, some final thoughts on what restrictions in duck season length would impact, who would it affect, and what would it do? So please, stick with us. Hold on, folks, don't turn that channel. We've got some really exciting news for you. The FowlWeather Podcast has teamed up with Wildlife Strategies. That's right, I'm now working directly with Ryan Delaney of Wildlife Strategies to build value into your land. Wildlife Strategies is already known for quality wildlife habitat management, be it deer, turkeys, ducks, or whatever you pursue. Ryan knows his stuff. Look, I don't add my name to just any business, but I believe in what Wildlife Strategies is doing for landowners throughout the Southeast U.S. and beyond. If you want science-based solutions to create great wildlife habitat, Wildlife Strategies is your best bet. If you're interested in ducks, when we say, may your skies be filled, well, Wildlife Strategies does just that. They fill your skies with ducks. Contact Ryan Delaney today at ryan@farmlg.com for a site visit. You won't be disappointed you did. Ryan covers the southern tier of states, and I'm available to build habitat management plans across the northern tier. Contact us today for a quote. The Wildlife Strategies team sees your property through from the initial assessment and development of a 3-year time frame management plan through annual check-ins and course corrections as needed. Contact Ryan today at ryan@farmlg.com or Dr. Mike at FowlWeather.co. You won't be disappointed you did. Fill your skies with ducks and your forests and fields with deer and turkey with Wildlife Strategies.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
And we're back. If you follow the chatter across Duck Country USA, then you are probably aware that there are some alarmists out there calling for changes to duck seasons, that ducks, and specifically mallards, are in so much trouble that we need to do something. That something that is discussed is reducing the numbers of days in your duck season because days kill ducks, not the bag limit. That is because most of us don't shoot more than 2 ducks on any given day. If the season is 60 days rather than, say, the alternatives, which are 45 or 30, right, we'll shoot less ducks. I'm not going to go through all the alternatives here. They are in the AHM, or Adaptive Harvest Management document online. You can type in U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, AHM ducks, AHM waterfowl, and it should pop up. So it is available for the public to see, just like all of these documents we've discussed. But in the Mississippi flyway, I'll go over here, is at 45 days, you can still shoot 6 ducks. This is the alternative under the 45-day framework. You can still shoot 6 ducks, 4 of which can be mallards, but only 1 of those can be a hen mallard. Then at the restrictive season of 30 days, you're also down to a 3 duck daily bag, of which 2 can be mallards with only 1 hen mallard. So if we went to a 45 or 30-day season, who do we know this affects? Let's start with the economy. From published reports on economic impacts of waterfowl hunting, we can calculate that in 2024, on average, a duck hunter is estimated to spend $70 per trip or day afield. Okay, I know a lot of folks spend more than that, some spend less of it, but on average, a duck hunter is estimated to spend $70 per trip or $70 per day afield. Now, there are many ways to slice this, so I'll hit a few buttons here, and yes, it changes the numbers, but you'll get the idea. If we use the estimated 7.7 million days afield by duck hunters across the U.S. and predict that it would cut that in half by restrictions in days, we could come up with a decreased influx of $270 million annually into the U.S. economy. But there's other ways to slice this as well. If we take the approximate 1.2 million duck hunters and reduce the numbers of days they go by 4 days less each season because it went to 45 days or 30 days, then we get an economic loss of $336 million. But if that number is 7, say jumps to 7, so people go 7 less days because we reduce the season by, let's say, 30 days, that number jumps to a staggering nearly $500 million in economic loss to rural communities, diners, gas stations, sporting goods stores. This also impacts tax dollars in the form of Pittman-Robertson funds, or PR funds, that go directly back towards conservation. So this is not inconsequential no matter how you slice it. Yeah, those numbers are different, but it's not inconsequential. Okay, let's just say, for instance, that only the Mississippi Flyway institutes a decrease in season length, which is kind of nearly impossible for that to happen. But 45% of duck hunters in the United States are in the Mississippi Flyway, so that economic impact is still relatively great. So let's be clear, my friends. This isn't just about the ducks. A reducing in days would also impact lives in rural America. It would impact all our good people across Duck Country USA. So, if reducing days actually save the duck population, which all of the best available science says it won't, then okay, go ahead and cut seasons by 15 or 30 days. But if it doesn't, if reducing the days doesn't actually save the duck population, then we're just giving up quality inputs to small town America during a period with inflation, high grocery prices, and everything else stacked up against them. We would just be giving up those great economic inputs into small town America with no gain for the ducks. In fact, once you figure in decreases in PR funds, it's actually a net loss for ducks and all the great duck culture across Duck Country USA. Okay, so maybe through some political pressure that does an end around on the scientific process, say Arkansas alone decides to cut days from their duck season. Then those that push that through the state institutional halls are directly impacting economic growth and input at the state scale in Arkansas alone. Again, I want to state that I'm not putting the economy or dollars and cents ahead of ducks. What I am saying is that if it doesn't save ducks, which all the good scientific information out there says it won't, restricting days will not have the impact on ducks that everybody thinks it does and grow the duck population, because it's mostly about habitat and it's mostly about water. What you've got is a situation where somehow we've reduced days, not saved the ducks, and just caused a negative impact on the economy. But let's tackle this next one, because I think it's most important, actually, is who gets hurt most by reductions in days. Because I don't even think it's the South like Arkansas. It's more likely to hurt hunters at mid-latitudes in the north. For goodness sake, the mallards don't even show up in the South until the last few weeks of season, sometimes anyway. Most of the time nowadays, on these increasingly mild years, the mallards don't even get to y'all in good numbers until January anyway. So if you cut your season to even a dismal 30 days, you'd still place it in the peak of mallard abundance. Some might argue, well, we could cut those last 2 weeks off because that's the impact on hens, which is probably what would happen, so you could hunt through the holidays, right? It wouldn't be about cutting those last 2 weeks because of the impact on ducks and mallards and hens and parabons and all that junk. It would be about making sure you could hunt through the holidays. So it would probably be from mid-December until the second week of January. Well, heck, a lot of years those mallards don't even show up until the last 2 weeks of January with all these mild temperatures. Anyhow, the South basically still gets a mallard season under 30 or 45 days because they don't have mallards all season long anyway. The north and mid-latitudes get hurt here because they typically have ducks throughout their entire 60-day season. So what does a reduction in days do? In my opinion, it saves mallards up north that don't get shot for folks down south to shoot. Think about that. The period when mallards are in the South could easily be placed into 45 days. It's also likely that it could even be placed during a 30-day period, especially with increasingly later mallard migration southward over the past few decades. Anyhow, Arkansas is still shooting more ducks than the entire country of Canada, so do what you want there with unpacking that. Lots of love for the duck hunting culture in Arkansas and what they provide in wintering habitat for our ducks. So no ill will here at all to the great state of Arkansas. Again, let's be clear, the push for reducing days to quote-unquote save the mallard population, I think is self-serving. It will hurt the economics of rural America, and it will serve to save mallards for Arkansas people to shoot and have a greater lion's share of those mallards. Here is where the rubber hits the road, though, kids. If it did, in fact, help the duck population, great, go for it. But damn it, the science, the great information out there does not support such a claim. It is baseless. Okay, you'll say, well, the numbers can't be right. We hear that too. Then quit using any of those numbers. Folks that are arguing about how horrible the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service data are also use those same data to uphold a preconceived stance in the next breath when it's convenient. This is almost as bad as the Atlantic flyway going back to a 30-day season at 1 Canada goose per day, despite that the model they asked the Fish and Wildlife Service to develop says they can stay in a more liberal framework. My goodness. The cherry picking of information to fit into an overly conservative mold that hurts hunters without serving the resource has to stop in the Atlantic flyway. And yes, you heard me right. It is almost certain that for the 25-26 season, not this year, but the 25-26 season, we will be back to 30-day season and 1 Canada goose, which essentially closes the season. Who goes for that? Anyhow, let's stick with the facts, folks. Let's let the great waterfowl biologists across Duck Country, USA do their job and continue to refine and improve upon their harvest management efforts. After all, we've been here before and the ducks have recovered. If your argument is that the conditions have changed and so we can't just do the same old, then do something about those habitat conditions. Join DU or Delta that advocate for habitat and hunters. Write your representative to get the conservation title of the Farm Bill done. But quit all this fighting and spreading of speculations and feelings about mallard shooting and drivers of mallard populations. We also want to note that folks have been saying, how is it that the mallard population increased this year? Well, it didn't. And if your math is mathing, you would have noted that the difference between last year's breeding mallard count and this year is not statistically different. So quit saying it increased and that can't be possible. There's a confidence limit around those data, and it's basically exactly the same this year. It's kind of what I would have expected. Let's also quit acting like we haven't been here before. The alarmist reaction has been the same in the past, and guess what? Duck populations rebounded when the prairies got wet again. And also, let's be clear that we've also seen ultra-high mallard numbers only a handful of times. It's not the norm. Mediocre duck numbers are the norm. Today, we sit at a low spot, but we've been here before and we will recover. So let's just keep our hats on and not get our panties in a bunch, my friends. We'll survive this lull like we did in the past. With any luck, we'll have a good old-fashioned cold winter this year to push those naive juveniles south. We will get cold and snow on the prairies to lock in that moisture, and we will be back on the upswing in no time. History tells us this will happen. Folks, it takes a village. We win when everybody eats. Thanks for listening, and as always, may your skies be filled and shoot straight, my friends.